You guys can have a seat. So as you guys know, if you've been around for the last several weeks, we've been showing these videos that really give such a wonderful representation of the work that God's been doing in our community over the course of the last decade here together. And what I love about all these videos is all the stories are unique, yet at the same time, there's so many common threads between so many stories together. And they're so beautiful. And Rochelle's story here this morning is just another powerful, transformative one. And so let's take a look at this one.
I grew up in a family that didn't have faith as their anchor. I didn't grow up around faith or Christianity, really kind of always found myself more spiritual and connecting with nature and having those moments, but I didn't really have a name for the feeling that I was connecting with. I had a strong belief in science and thinking about trying to get the answers to questions and trying to find those answers. And I also always thought that faith and science could not be blended. You had to be one or the other. And so I definitely felt like I had chosen science and that was my path. I never felt drawn to the church because I also felt that Christianity was what the media portrayed Christianity to be. And so I really didn't feel like I would ever be a part of that. I was coming down to visit Richmond with a friend that lived near here, and she had me stay over, and she was just like, hey, we're going to church on Sunday. And I was like, yeah, I'll stay back. And she was like, no, you should come because it's what we do on Sunday, so just come with us. So I came to Hill City and I walked in and lightning didn't strike me, and I just realized how warm and non-judgmental these people were. And the warm friendliness and fun vibe that I got from the church just upon entry, and realizing that I didn't have to know everything. The way Wags does his sermons is to teach people that don't know the Bible. So I didn't feel like an outcast right at the beginning. He was introducing me to Moses. He was introducing me to things in the gospel. And I started to prioritize Sundays and to go to Hill City because I was just curious, and they let me have that curiosity. I got plugged into Starting Point, which is now a discipleship group, and I really just ran with all the discipleship groups. Not only was I building my faith in that time and forming a relationship with Jesus, but I was also building the strongest community that I've ever had in a city. I joined a team, and I eventually saw in an email that they were needing help with disability ministry, and I really didn't think much of it when I offered myself to join because I had a background in working with kids with disabilities, and I feel like the trajectory of my faith and my connection to God and my real purpose of being in Richmond really started blooming from there. I've gotten to work with some amazing kids and help share the gospel in a different way so that these kids can understand what's going on. They might not learn in the same way that we learn at church or what other kids at church do, and so we help kind of break it down in a language in a way that they can help understand it too. And watching God work through those kids has been really special. Life has totally flipped upside down of my belief system of going from no faith background to being able to feel comfortable opening a Bible, reading it, and it's been so life-changing for me because I struggle with anxiety and depression, and one thing that helps me get through depression is knowing my story isn't over yet, and God's changed my path so many different times when I thought that I had it figured out, and He turned my direction around, but what I felt was a failure or a crisis, it turned into something that was bigger than I could have seen. 5 years ago, I had nothing to do with faith, no knowledge, no direction in it, and now my life is grounded in it. My future marriage is going to be grounded and centered on Jesus. There's just a calming, relaxing in knowing that he's got me and there's more work for him to do.
All these stories are just so wonderful. So as Rochelle mentioned, we're part of like what we love doing here and when we teach is like really going through the Bible and bringing people along on the journey. And so we're in the Gospel of John. So if you're not familiar with the Bible, there are 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and what? Great, you guys are off to a great start. And what these Gospels do is they detail out the life and the teachings of Jesus. And these are eyewitness accounts that these guys like brought together, and they took all of the stories and they wrote it a little bit after he had died and then rose again. But they take all these stories and they're trying to tell us like this about this larger story that's happening. It's very personal as we engage these stories, but it's also incredibly communal in what it means for us as Christians. And so we're going to be in this gospel for a long time, and we'll pop in and out of it probably over the course of the next 18 months together or so. But what we're doing is we really want to take a look at like, why was this so important? And like, what was it to John that he shared these stories that he shares? And at the end of actually his writing, John eventually says, hey, I'm telling you guys all these stories so that you may believe in Jesus. And that's the reason. So you may believe in Jesus and that these things are real and what he said was real. And so we're going to get into, we went through the first chapter these first few weeks, and then we're going to pop into the second chapter here today of John. And we're going to start getting to some of his miracles. All right. And so we sang about miracles. And how many guys have ever prayed for a miracle? Yeah, some of you guys may have seen a miracle, and miracles can look a lot of different ways, and we'll talk about those here in a second. But one of the stories that is one of the coolest stories, I think, in the Bible is this story that we're going to read today. So I'm going to ask you guys to stand for the reading of Scripture this morning. We'll be in John chapter 2. It says this: on the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Tragedy. And, "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replies, "My hour is not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, and the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, and each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. Amen? You guys can have a seat. So this story, is it about drinking and alcohol? No, and maybe partially yes. This discussion around alcohol, pops up a lot. Here's what I would say. There is no biblical or cultural evidence that what Jesus did, he didn't turn it into grape juice. Okay, so there's no cultural evidence or literary evidence or biblical evidence that it wasn't real wine. Okay, so that is part of the story. It's real wine. It's not like, he created Welch's. It's not like what happened. So that's like one part of the story. I would also say this: sometimes people can bring in our own stories to this story. So you might have family who struggles with alcohol. You yourself might have struggled with alcohol. And I understand that. And so a story like this can like bring up a lot of emotion and everything. And alcohol can as well in that topic. And so, but we do see in Scripture that alcohol is not deemed like a sin in and of itself. Can it become one? Yes, of course. And so Jesus does this incredible miracle, and it's the equivalent of about 1,000 bottles of wine. Okay, what he does. They're about, they determine there's probably 400 or 500 people in all of Cana. So he just threw a rager of a party with what he did. And so then you take this and you're like, well, is Jesus promoting drunkenness? Like, there's no way it was real wine because there's so much wine there. Is Jesus actually promoting drunkenness? And it's like, no, Jesus isn't promoting drunkenness like through this. And he wouldn't go against what the Bible says about getting drunk. In the same way, you guys know the story when Jesus, well, we'll actually go through this at a different point in time, when the loaves and the fish, right? And he turned and he has all this food left over. Well, he wasn't promoting gluttony there either. All right, and so, or when he calls, at one point he calls the leaders a brood of vipers. All right, now to us that doesn't seem like a lot, but you hear a lot of scholars talk about like the term brood of vipers could have been equivalent in modern day times to like dropping an F-bomb. That's how like serious the term was. And so Jesus wasn't promoting like foul language towards anyone else either. So there's a larger picture that's happening within the story, and that's what's really important. All right, that's what's really important. So the discussion of alcohol, is it good or bad or whatever, like some of that stuff is just, it's nuanced and it's complicated and all of that stuff. But what we see is Jesus actually turning water into actual wine in here. And there's so many cool things in this passage. Like I just love the Bible. Like I love it. It's the coolest thing. And I never understand why people don't like to study it, because it's like an unending source of incredible stories and knowledge, and it gets into your soul, but then there's just so much to just learn. And so even when the writers of the Bible, so in this case John, as he's writing this, he does some like really cool things, and one of the first things he talks about is a sign. Now, when you guys see a sign like this, and you're on the road, your first thought is like, let's go. Right, like it's like you love a good 70. Like we were in New Mexico. They had an 80 mile per hour zone, and I was like, yes, like this is like God's grace to us. And so you have this, and you see this sign, and you see like, oh, like I can probably go 77 to 80, right? That's what you're really thinking, and then or you might be thinking a Prius will never get there, and but you see a sign like this, But the sign's really pointing to something bigger. It's pointing to a communal safety. It's pointing to creating boundaries so everyone can be safer. It's creating like this system that we can all operate in so it isn't just utter chaos. So even a sign like this, though we see it and we see it as an individual sign, it's actually pointing to something far larger than what's happening around us. And that's what John is talking about with these miracles that we're going to read about for the next several weeks, is there are these signs that Jesus goes through. And there are 7 of them in particular that John wrestles with that are pointing to something that is far larger. And so John, as he's talking throughout these stories, again, I just want to give you like a glimpse into what the Bible can do. He'll do something like this. And so what day does he say this wedding took place? Third. All right, great. So the third day it's like fascinating. So John writes this, and it's like, man, the third day, why would he leave that detail in there? And is that detail really important? It's like it can be. Sometimes it's just stating like it's the third day. But sometimes those details are important. As an example, the third day in the creation story was very significant because the second day wasn't deemed good, it wasn't blessed. But in Jewish culture, they believe the third day was doubly blessed. And so a lot of weddings would take place on the third day of the week. And so why? Because it was a double blessed day. So it's like John saying here, like on the third day, like is this a double blessed day because it's the wedding? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We don't actually know, but there's something that could be tied in there. Or in the chapter before this, there weren't chapter breaks. So when John writes the letter, it just kind of writes the whole letter. We see it now as chapter 1 and chapter 2, but it wasn't originally done that way. John talks about this 4 days that he was with the disciples, that Jesus was with the disciples, and then there's another third day that comes in here, and what's 4 plus 3? Okay. I feel like it should have been a resounding 7, but we're still here. So 7, and 7 is like an incredibly significant number, this day of completion, and so John is like, is John pointing to the third day as like some kind of day of completion? Maybe. maybe there's something there too. And so John is doing some of these things. And then, and what day was Jesus, when you guys know the story about Jesus, he died and then he rose again on which day? Wow. And so maybe John is doing something really interesting here, because John wrote this about 25 to, well, maybe it's a little more 25 to 50 years after Jesus had died and rose again. So maybe John, because this is the way it was done from a literary perspective, there were all these little clues. And so John's like, on the third day, so the listener would be like, third day, I know that. That's when Jesus was resurrected. So am I supposed to focus on the resurrection of Jesus in this story of him turning water into wine? And John would say, yes, that's what you're supposed to do. And so John is trying to give these clues, these little breadcrumbs for us to begin to be able to see the story a little bit bigger. And so it's important because there's a larger story that's being told in the context of this little story. So we see a little detail in here too. What town was the wedding in? Cana, right? So they're in the town of Cana. Now, if you were here last week, you learned that Nathanael was actually from Cana. And it says that Jesus and his disciples were actually invited to the wedding. They're invited to it. And so, and then Mary comes on the scene, and she's got this big role. She's so concerned about running out of wine. Right, she's so concerned with it. And so what that leads us to believe is that Mary had some kind of pivotal role in the wedding, which only a family member would have. Right, and so Mary is probably one of Jesus' brothers that's getting married in this scenario. And a lot of scholars believe it may have been Nathanael's sister that was part of it. All right, so they're at this wedding. It's like a family wedding that they're all invited to. Now, here's what's interesting about your typical Jewish celebration when it comes to a wedding. They were about a week long. All right, so celebration. If you guys have ever planned for one reception for 5 hours, it's a lot, like a lot goes into it, and you spend so much money making this happen. So can you imagine a week long? All right, a week long. And then there are all these different like celebratory elements within the context of the wedding ceremony, and you had to observe Shabbat a lot of times during it because it would cover that. And so there are all these things like linked in together during the wedding ceremony. Well, one of the things that would happen is the bride and the groom, they would be wearing typically some form of purple or blue that represented royalty. And so no matter what kind of class you were in, you were stepping into this marriage ceremony, and they looked at you as like a king and a queen. All right, so the idea of wearing white in a wedding, that came like centuries later. And so if you're getting married anytime soon, just wear purple. I'd be like, I'm very biblical around this. And so in particular, the wives would wear purple. And so the people invited to the wedding, it was interesting, the communal celebration in Jewish culture is just so fantastic. And the way that they would do this is they would invite basically the whole town to the wedding. So they would invite their friends and their family members. The poor in the community would be able to come because they wanted the poor in the community to be able to celebrate. And they would also invite all the wealthy and the dignitaries as well. And then everyone brought gifts except the poor. The poor were not expected to bring any gifts to the wedding. They were just expected to come, be a part of this wedding celebration, and just have a really good time. Like, how cool is that? And but if you and I were on the same status and I brought a gift that was worth $100, you had this like social debt. So then I invited you to the wedding. You brought a gift of $100. Will you invite me to your daughter's wedding? How much money am I bringing? What kind of gift? $100. So there's like social debt that would start to happen within that. If you were wealthy or one of the dignitaries in town, the expectation of your gift was going to be like way bigger. All right. So you have all these gifts, all these things that are happening, all these rules start being associated with even the wedding ceremony, because what would start to transpire as well is people could, if they were manipulative, they could take advantage of the gifts. And so they might have a wedding and ask for all these kinds of gifts, but then not give the money back. And so the religious leaders at the time put all these like rules in place about a wedding. Like if you didn't have enough food for everyone, you could be brought to court. If you ran out of wine, you could actually be brought to court, and then the groom could be sent to prison for running out of wine. All right, so there are all these rules around the wedding. And then part of the other thing with the wedding was everyone, it was like a week-long party. It would start off in the bride's house, eventually move to the groom's house, but it would start off in the bride's house. Everyone's having a party, and then they have this thing called like the bedchamber, okay? And again, just picture like if this was still alive today, it's crazy. But so all the people are having a party. So you guys are having a party. And then there'd be a grouping of us that were close. And we would consider them like the wedding party right now. And we would take the groom and the bride to the bedchamber, all right? And what happens in the bedchamber, right, is this, right? Yes. And so in the bedchamber. So then everyone comes back out, right? And they have this moment. And everyone comes out and they're like, it's done. And then they would go and then they go to the groom's house and celebrate a little bit more afterwards, right? So that is like background to the story that we just read. So there's a lot of things happening and there's a lot of context that really deeply matters. But what does that actually say about Jesus? What does the story say about Jesus? Here's the first thing it says, that following Jesus should be joyful. Following Jesus should be joyful. A friend of mine sent me this video this week. He had no idea I was actually preaching on the wedding of Cana. He just thought it was funny. And so he sent me this video of Jesus turning water into wine if it was a party. It cracks me up because I'm like, this is how we picture Jesus, just staring at everybody. Like, I just did this for you, and now you're going to do this. And one of the things one of our core values here at Hill City is we value fun. Like, that is like literally one of our core values. And what's funny about it is over the last 10 years, that has been a detractor for some people. And even sometimes we've had people come to church and be like, I used to think a certain way about your church because you guys had fun. And I just thought you were shallow. And but I've been here a few times now and I realize that's not who you guys are. And I'll always ask, I was like, well, what's the problem with having fun? And a couple of different times over the last decade, people are like, well, Christians don't do that. And it's crazy. It's crazy. Like, following Jesus should be fun. And it should be joyful. One of Lacey's favorite verses is, the joy of the Lord is our strength. And it's like, there's something about the joy that we can have in Jesus, but we can move away from it so quickly. And there are, multiple reasons that might happen. It might be because you're going through just a really difficult time in life. And you just feel like, man, I thought Jesus was going to answer my prayers in a different way, and they just haven't been answered in that way. And all of a sudden, you feel like the fun is sucked out of it. Or maybe you grew up in an environment where fun wasn't a part of church, which is really sad. Or maybe like you just lost the sense of fun for yourself. And you're like, that's for the teenagers, but now that I'm an adult, we just don't, we're very serious in church. And so we start seeing that, no, part of this is like, to follow Jesus should be fun. When you use descriptors like that, the light of the world, or there's something inside of you, you're this new creation, there should be a joy and a celebration that comes out of us. One of the most wonderful things about Jewish culture, and there's a lot of wonderful things about Jewish culture, but one of the most wonderful things is the way they celebrate and all their festivals and the way that they remember what God has done and everything. And it's ingrained in the culture to have fun, like celebration and joy is a part of it. I remember when we were in Israel years ago, and one of the things that struck me was how much the men were dancing. We saw that on several different occasions of the men dancing, but we don't see that as much in our culture. Of course. And some of you are like, no, man, I get after it. But I'm like, as a whole, man, the men were dancing a lot. And it was just interesting to watch. But there's a joy, there's a celebratory element to this. Also, Jesus was someone that people wanted to hang out with. And I'm like, as Christians, we should be the most friendly, the most joyous. I mean, we're saying that as a Christian, when you say you follow Jesus, you believe that he died and rose again, you're also saying, I believe in this message that literally is the greatest hope for the entire world. But I'm mad about it. And I'm a jerk about it. It doesn't even make any sense, like just logically. That we should be joyous people. It doesn't mean we ignore bad things or that we won't go through bad times or anything, but there's a joy center inside of all of us. When you think about what must have transpired in this wedding moment when, the water gets turned into wine and it's like, But what is it? Like, what's the larger story? In the Bible, wine is often associated with joy, and wine is associated with celebrations. And even in the Old Testament, repeatedly it talks about the fruit of our joy, and it uses wine as an example of how that begins to tie in. In 1 Corinthians, it talks about that God loves a cheerful giver. Like a cheerful giver. Well, why is that? There should be this joy, and when we follow, this joy in our generosity, this joy when we're around people. We should be people that people want to hang out with. I love when Jesus does this too, as he turns the water into wine. He deeply cares about the experience that people are having in life. You know, one of the things that when we started this church, we would always talk about people's experience. We didn't own the building at the time, and we were just like, all right, there's a lot of work that needs to happen still in this building, and we were over in a different room, and we were really concerned with what people's experience would be. And so we're like, all right, when people have an experience, it's like, man, they really start thinking about a lot of different things, and we figured out that one day I was sitting down, I was just mapping out someone's experience coming into church. And before I would ever get to say anything in a sermon, typically you would have 14 or 15 experiences that you are determining something about our church. They range from like when you drive in to signage, to how friendly the parking lot people are, to the front door, to the music that's playing, to what the chairs are like. That means like a whole slew of things, right? If you have kids, you can add on another 4 or 5 experiences as you go out there. And so we think about it, it's like, it's like someone's experience deeply matters. And where do we get that from? And it's like in this time, Jesus is like, man, they're running out of wine. And he deeply cares about your experience in life. He cares about how you experience life and the level of fun that you have in life and what you begin to see. At the end, it talks about how Jesus brings the best wine. He brings the best wine. It's the best experience. It's the best gift. We'll talk about in a second. It's the best blessing. But Jesus brings the best, and they see it at best. And it's like, no, like all this has already happened. So when the master of the banquet comes and he's like, hey, he's like, really what ends up happening is people get a little tipsy, and then you can give them whatever you want for drink because it doesn't matter. But it's crazy. You save the best for last. And it's like, what he's saying here is like, listen, I get it. All this life has happened, and you think it's really good, but when you experience what Jesus has to offer, it's the best. It's the best. And do you live your life that way? So if you say this, if I went to you and I said, hey, are you a follower of Jesus? And you're like, yes, Wags, I'm a follower of Jesus. And if I said to you, isn't it the best? And do you live that out? Would you go, I mean, it's fine. It's like, it's just the hope of the world. It's fine. I don't know. If that's the response, let me just put this and challenge you. You have not fully experienced the reality of Jesus yet. You've gotten a glimpse. Or maybe you did know it at one point, and you've let your heart get so hardened, or you've let something else tell a narrative in your story that you forgot that it's the best. It's the best. The grace, the loving kindness, the patience, the ability to say like, that the story of Jesus like took sin and purified me? What? It's the best. Nothing else offers that. But is that what comes out of us as we begin to live our lives around us? The second thing that we see here is that, that following Jesus is a blessing. Following Jesus is a blessing. It's funny when we talk about blessing, we think of blessing as favor, or we think of it as getting something as a gift, or be blessed. Be blessed, we might say it to someone else. Or, you get a promotion, it's like, I'm so blessed, and that might be true. It also might not be true. You might handle that money really bad. And so, like, there's a level of like sometimes misunderstanding of blessing. And what's fascinating is, isn't it true, though, that actually following Jesus is the blessing? Not not like all of a sudden all of our prayers start getting answered, or not that it's like my life is like perfect now, and not that we do everything perfectly. So no, following Jesus is actually the blessing. The gift that we have to be able to do that, like that's the blessing in all of this. When Jesus and his mother Mary have this experience, right before this verse, he says, mother. And when you read that verse as mother, like it sounds like he's like, why are you interrupting me? Yeah, it's not really what he's doing. There's you could use that term back then. It was not a derogatory way to speak to someone else. And so, but he says mother, he says, the hour has not come, and I'll get to that in just a second. But then his mom, Mary, turns around and he says to the servants, hey, do whatever he tells you. Do whatever he tells you. And what's cool is like there's this level of obedience that's happening there. How many of you guys love to obey? Yeah. Very few of us. There's some people who like love a good rule, and you're like, I love a good rule. Like, and I'll like, but a lot of us in this room are like, I don't like love to obey. I don't love it. What's interesting is even when you think about boundaries in our lives, which is really the idea of discipline and obedience, and you start seeing that it's actually boundaries in our life that lead to the most freedom we can possibly have. And you start seeing that, even as like parents, I think about boundaries we have for our kids and in obedience. Now, do any kids love to obey? No, I didn't love to obey. Lacey might have. It's whatever. It's whatever. But most people don't, and most people don't like to obey. And so, but what you start seeing is what happens is like staying within the boundaries, you start building up trust. And then your character starts getting built up. And then there's a lot of freedom that gets built up. And then within that freedom, we get to experience so much more. And so these boundaries actually create all this freedom. It's like, oh, even Mary's like saying, hey, just obey what he says. Obey what he says. And listen, it's just a blessing to do that. And I don't know what he's going to do here, but like, just obey whatever he says to do. Now here's what's so cool with the servants. They have some level of trust with Mary, and so they're like, all right, we'll just go obey whatever Jesus says. One of the like hidden parts of the story that I really do like is the fact that the servants got to be part of the miracle simply by being obedient. A lot of times we're like, well, I want to be part of the miracle. I'm going to pray for someone, and I want them, to be healed, whatever like that. And it's like, but what if your part of the miracle is just simply being obedient and serving the ones around you? How cool is that? Like they're a part of the miracle. They get to see this incredible blessing. And I always wonder too about the people in the party, because at that time, obviously, they see the water turn into wine, and obviously that's crazy, but they don't really know what happened behind the scenes, and they don't know what transpired. And I just wonder how often, like later on when they're telling this story, like, yo, we were at this party in Cana, and behind Jesus turned this water into wine, but like, you'll never believe what was happening behind the scenes. And sometimes it's always like the look back that we get to see the blessing. Never forget the look back. You start looking back in your life, you're like, man, this was a really tough season in life, but man, when I look back, now I see God working in all these different ways. When I look back, I start seeing, man, all these people were serving, all these people were bringing me meals, all these people were praying for me, all these people were trying to hug on me and encourage me. It's like, man, what a blessing. Where's that from? Just following Jesus. We see these miracles, and they're crazy. Like the water and the wine is a crazy miracle. You know what's like really cool about the miracle itself, though? So many of Jesus' miracles required the ingredients to actually be there. So they take the loaves and fish when he multiplies all of them. The ingredients of like loaves and fish were actually there. What's cool about the water and the wine, that the ingredients for the grapes, right? The grapes weren't there. So Jesus takes something that wasn't there and does something else with it. And it's like, you might not have exactly what you need inside of you right now, but Jesus can still do a miracle with that. Something you've been longing for, Jesus can still do something inside you, even if the ingredients aren't quite there yet. But to believe and to have hope and to follow and to just put yourself in a position of obedience and surrender. And I just wonder if something will begin to be produced there that you never thought could have been otherwise. I love how this story of Jesus creating from water into wine, he actually does something really neat. Water was a cleansing material, and in particular for Jewish folks, they would always be washing their hands, they would wash the utensils, they were really concerned with, for multiple reasons, of being clean versus unclean. And so water in this wedding, like that was the purification system. So even when Jesus did the miracle of turning water into wine, he took away their version of purifying themselves. Because he took it away. So even as he does this miracle, he actually created another problem. And so again, there's a larger picture that's happening within this story. It's like Jesus is like, no, you think you can purify yourself this way? I'm telling you it's only through me. There's this new wine I want to give you. And this new wine gives you something new. You're a new creation. There's something that can purify your very soul. When I think about miracles, I'll be honest, I used to believe them more as a kid than I did as an adult. And I used to, there's like a childlike wonder around them. And as I got older, I think I started to just temper my belief in miracles. And you would start, someone would get healed and you might start thinking like, well, the doctors did, or the medicine did, or maybe they weren't actually that bad. And you start like thinking, or man, people have been praying about that for a long time. I don't even know if it could happen, and you could do that. And a few years ago, it was probably 2 years ago now at this point, I was just having a moment with God, and one of the questions that came to my mind was, why would I put limits on God if he never put limits on me? And I played around with that question for me because I was like, man, he could have looked at my life and been like, you've tapped out. Even me standing up here on this stage, if people knew me in high school or college, and even my family would say this too, but like, it's a miracle that I'm up here standing, not because physically standing, spiritually standing on the stage. There was a miracle that happened. And it's interesting because when I think about my own story, I'm like, why would I ever stop believing in the possibility of God doing a miracle? I don't know what miracles look like, and you can think you want it one way, but God wants to do it another way. And maybe the miracle doesn't actually happen until we experience the ultimate miracle in heaven. Like maybe that's true. But why would we ever put a limit on God? And this story is actually pointing us in this direction. When Jesus says to Mary, he's like, my hour has not come, all he's saying is, listen, this journey to the cross, this is what he's saying. The journey to the cross, as soon as I do this miracle, the journey to the cross begins. That's the ultimate blessing. That's the ultimate miracle. It's the ultimate thing that we're looking for. It's the ultimate hope. And Jesus is like, hey, when I do this, the journey begins. And at the end, it says that his disciples, they believed because it revealed something about Jesus. It revealed his glory, meaning he was who he said that he was the presence of God amongst the people. And his disciples started to believe. And was it the miracle? No, it was something that they saw inside of him that was different. There was something that presented itself through this miracle. There was a larger story being told. The band's going to come up here, and you guys can start coming up. And they're going to sing one more song called Waymaker, and it's an old one we used to do. But the words of the song are so pivotal. But I was reflecting on some of the recent songs we've been singing that lines just stick out that talk about, and Rochelle even referenced this, but there's this one song that we sing, More Than Able, and the little tag on the end of the song says that he's not done with me yet, that there's so much more to this story. You're not done with me yet. And it says, who am I to deny what the Lord can do, right? And we have this moment, and you think about that phrasing, and it's like, who am I to deny what the Lord can do? There's this, one of the new songs that we'll sing it next week too, but the new thing coming, and I love it. There's this little phrase in the hook. It says, I got a new mind, a new heart, a fresh faith, a new wine, a now word. And so this morning, I just want us all to wrestle with this idea of following Jesus. Is it actually joyful in my life? Do I see it as a blessing? And maybe there's just something there for you to take hold on of maybe you've lost it, or maybe you've never seen it. Or maybe this is the day that you're like, you know what? Everything else this life has to offer, it's nothing compared to the story of Jesus and what this points to. So can you bow your heads for a second? I just want you to have a moment of reflection and